Grazie mille. Where does what you write come from? People are always asking me that question. And I never really know what to say. Whenever I think about it, the answer just seems to elude me. It feels like I just write the words and see what happens. I do know this. When I approach a new project, I will often realize that I've been thinking about that particular subject and unconsciously researching it for many years, sometimes decades. After it is all written, it will all seem as though everything was leading up to that moment of starting to write. In other instances, I can trace what I write to a particular place within myself, a particular state of mind. In the case of The Leisure Seeker, it was a place of pain and grief, exhaustion and relief. That book, I realize now, was the result of years of strain on my family, of watching my father mentally deteriorate and watching my mother physically deteriorate. Yet I also know that the book grew from a different place, from a different kind of pain, a pain more related to the word. One word in particular, rejection. The agony of the apathy of the publishing world when it came to my work. The hurt of knowing that no one is interested in the words you write. All writers know that this is the one time when no one is asking you a question like, where does what you write come from? Because no one cares. After Secondhand came out in America in 2000, I had foolishly thought that getting another book out into the world would be much easier. Instead, 5 years passed. I wrote another book that no publisher wanted, while my father grew sicker from Alzheimer's. When he died, I felt unmoored and abandoned, halfway to orphandom. At the same time, the literary world had also abandoned me. I had lost my publisher, my editor, my agent. I was by myself. It had turned out that I would need to start all over again. The words that helped me then let me down. The flow of them had not stopped, but the interest in them had. There was a moment in 2005 when I remember thinking, after 20 years of writing, of just quitting. For the first time, this seemed like a viable prospect, maybe even a wise one. Then it simply occurred to me, I didn't want to quit. I wanted to keep writing. So I decided that I was just going to write something that I wanted and needed to write. I assumed that it would never be published or amount to anything, and I was all right with that. I was just going to write. I look at that moment now, and it occurs to me that it was one of the purest moments I'd ever had in my life as a writer. At this point, I do have to mention that the utter pretentiousness of the words that I just spoke make me kind of cringe. Moment of purity. I can't even say it without rolling my eyes, so forgive me. Still, I fear that it's true, that it was indeed a moment of purity. Frankly, I've always been a bit frightened to examine my true intentions for writing. I've always peered at them with a kind of side-eyed suspicion, never quite trusting if I was doing it all for the right reasons. Was I looking for something beyond myself, to elevate myself, for notoriety or wealth, or something equally, how to put this, American? Was that all I was about? It made me sad to think so. I hoped that wasn't true. I didn't think that was true. All I really knew was that for whatever the reasons, I physically and mentally needed to write, to keep that flow of words happening. That feeling of being bereft when not writing has been happening to me for a long time. When I don't have the time or energy or mental wherewithal to write, I fall into a depression. In most cases with me, that has happened because of a job. We people from Detroit have strange relationships with our jobs. From birth, it seems, we are told to work and work and work and work. And if we don't work hard enough, we are told we are lazy and useless. The thing is, most of the artists I know apply that same Midwestern factory town work ethic to making art or writing or making music. It's confusing because we'll then also apply it to our day jobs, the work we have to do to pay our bills. Inevitably, it is the work that suffers. It is the art that suffers. I have been fortunate. When I've felt bereft because I don't have time to write, I usually end up quitting the job. When I'm able to write again, I'm fine. Does that mean that the flow of words, wherever they come from, is some sort of panacea to writers? I don't know about others, but it is to me. I also know that sometimes the need to write feels like a curse. But that's usually when the words aren't coming. Perhaps the reason I arrived at that so-called moment of purity, when I decided I was still going to write, though it wouldn't be published and would never amount to anything, was because I really had nothing left to lose. It's that point in time when you no longer care about the consequences. You no longer care about what you have to gain or lose by doing something. You just do it. Let the words come. Maybe that's what you need to achieve a moment of purity. For me, at that moment in 2005, everything was gone. I felt very much alone. Yet once I grew accustomed to being on my own, with no literary personnel, with no reason to write other than the pleasure and relief it offered me, I actually found it exciting and liberating. Now I recognize that the idea of having nothing left to lose was not just something that fueled the flow of words, it even fueled the characters, especially those of John and Ella in The Leisure Seeker. They find themselves in that very position at the beginning of the book. Not caring anymore can give someone a very particular type of courage that they may not normally be able to muster otherwise. For me, that I just don't give a fuck anymore courage allowed me to write just for the sake of writing. Not for attention, not for money, not for any of those wrong reasons. I did it only to write. So, what was born of that immaculate moment of purity? I got attention, money, and someone made a film out of what I'd written. Sometimes I really just don't understand the way the world works. But we're still considering that nagging question. Where does what you write come from? We have to know that if grief and rejection and abandonment can trigger the flow of words, it only makes sense that it can be triggered by something else at the other end of the spectrum. How a book can come from a place of gladness, of release, or even a kind of joyous obsession. Such is the case of my new novel, Beautiful Music. This side of the story is about the words that flow from joy. I am of a certain age, of an age where the music I grew up with, rock and roll, was once the most popular music in America. That is, before it became the music of dinosaurs. The music scowled at by punk culture, the music that had spurred punk culture. It was music that started out rebellious, grew excessive, ponderous, and wrong-headed, then much later became the music most played in drugstores by middle-aged assistant managers with mustaches, wearing ties and short-sleeve shirts. Here was music that had become seriously uncool. For a long time, I avoided classic rock. I wanted to forget that I was once obsessed by this music, that it was the feedback-laced soundtrack of my youth. I wanted to forget that I had stood up, held my lighter aloft, and cheered at the shows of bands that now kind of embarrassed me. Bands that all my punk rock friends who had come of age in the 80s, listening to Black Flag or the Dead Kennedys, would curl their lips and groan at. I wanted to forget that everything important that happened in my teenage life had happened with Led Zeppelin or Foghat or the Blue Oyster Cult on in the background. Then I thought about all the joy that music had given me in all its glorious excess and absurdity. I started to think about growing up and the pleasure of holding a record album in my hands, placing it on a turntable, gently lowering the tone arm onto the vinyl disc, and after the hiss and the click of the needle finding the groove, feeling in that moment before the music began, that anything could happen. And how, when that music was playing, all my fears and worries and sadnesses went away. I started to think about all this music and all the pleasure and relief and joyous mania it had brought into my life, and I just started to write. Everything that I could remember about that time, and everything I was listening to while it happened. That led me to remember that there was something else in the air in Detroit in the 1970s, besides the ecstatic noise of rock and roll. There was also fear and rage and hate and ugliness. It was just there. It was so common, and we were so used to it, we didn't even realize it was there. We were all breathing it in. We didn't even realize when it changed us, when it turned us into people we never should have been, when it affected our collective humanity. Where the fear and anger collided with the music, that's when the book seemed to coalesce. A young boy trying to figure out where he stood in the middle of all of it, afraid and abandoned halfway to orphandom. His only sanctuary, the music. His solace, but also the source of his power, his agent for change. So the writing that had originally sprung from joy and obsession had led to a darker place. Where does what you write come from? That question, it's still annoying. But now I feel a little closer to being able to answer it. What we write comes from everywhere. Everything we feel as humans, everything we love, everything we despise, everything we fear, everything that nurtures us. It comes from the air we breathe, the food we eat, the music we listen to, the places we travel, the lives that we live, and the deaths at which we arrive after living those lives. And the words that we use to describe those lives and deaths are where it comes from too. So, are writers alchemists that conjure gold from words? As much as my writerly ego would like to answer with a resounding yes, the answer is probably no. Yet writers and their words are here to remind us of who we are, to reveal to us the beauty and ugliness of the world, to point and laugh at the absurdity of being human, to testify to the importance of a life. And if you're a fiction writer, you may very well use a character, a fictional life, to do those things. And that fictional life can make us truly understand what it means to be alive and human, often more so than our own eyes and ears can empirically reveal to us. Picasso once said, "Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth." In his Poetics, Aristotle posited, "Poetry is a more philosophical and more excellent thing than history, for poetry is chiefly conversant about general truth, history about particular." Sorry, historians. Finding that general or universal truth is where writers, particularly fiction writers, do their thing. How with words, they can make us feel certain emotions, allow us to envision the star-spattered sky over a lake at night, or to hear the ticking sound of a cooling automobile engine. Writers and their words make us feel less alone in the world, help us to feel less afraid, teach us to understand people who may not be like us, but who are probably a lot like us. That starts to feel pretty magical when you think about it. So, it's all conjured out of nowhere? No, it comes from somewhere. And where it comes from is different for each of us. Our particular pains and joys, our tragedies and victories, that we all process into something unique. Universal truth comes from individual experience. How we dare to convert that experience is up to us. Jack Kerouac in his journals once said, "And this is the way a novel gets written, in ignorance, fear, sorrow, madness, and a kind of psychotic happiness that serves as an incubator for the wonders being born." Yet those wonders don't come easy. Most of the writers here today know that the more uncomfortable we are while writing something, the better it probably is. If you're afraid of it, that's good. That's when you know you've hit pay dirt. To quote Kerouac again, "What a man most wishes to hide, revise, and unsay is precisely what literature is waiting and bleeding for." So, perhaps it's the exploration that's the important part, and not necessarily the origin. The prodding eye into our pains and joys, our shames and affections, the things we do when no one is looking. How when we eat alone, we lick the plate clean. How we pee in the shower in the morning to save time. Or how we cry over a stupid television commercial when we know we're being manipulated. What drives people to desperate, terrible acts? What makes us believe in something greater than ourselves? Our worst and our best moments. The horribleness and the wonderfulness of everything. That's where what I write comes from. How about you?